Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever and whenever you're listening to this. My name is Andy Andreas with Grace Healing, and I have with me Larry again today. Hey, Larry, how are you doing?
Great. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. In our weekly series, we were just talking, Larry and I, what's rising in our heart, and I think we are going to focus today on talking about how to live in the moment. In a broader sense, how do we as humans deal with concepts, ideas, and perceptions? I think that's really the crux of the matter where we sometimes struggle in life. And last week during the meditation, Larry, you pointed out a book, Alchemy by Paul Selig, one of the series that he has written, and it sounded really appealing to me. I got the book and started reading and listening to it, actually. I'd like to start off by reading a small paragraph
Of course.
about it, and that kind of frames our discussion today.
Yes.
And it goes like this. The realization of the divine in any moment claims eternity. The moment you sit in now is the only moment there is. Everything else is an idea. Yesterday, an idea. Tomorrow, an idea. And what yesterday was is also an idea. There is no reality to it except what you claim for it. I remember my son when he was 5 years old, or I remember my wife when we wed. These are ideas. They are not realities, but you suppose they are and consequently attach meaning to them. Tomorrow is the same. It is just an idea. If there were no word tomorrow, if you were not predicating a day upon a sunrise and a sunset, what would the day be except the moment you sit in? This paragraph really made me think quite a bit. And to me, it says it all, that we struggle living in the moment. And why is it? Is it because of all these ideas and conceptions and conditions that we are surrounded with?
Well, like even one of the things that I know that's close to your heart, where you have a marriage ministry in working with people and bringing them together in marriage, like you said, how I knew my wife or my bride or whatever. And the reality is you don't. You have a perceived notion of who they are in the moment you connect with them, but you don't know them. And as life progresses, you discover more and more, many more facets, many more issues, many more things, many more aspects of the person. So you really didn't know them, but you knew you were moving in a direction with them. So if what he's describing in this book, Paul, to be in that moment of recognition is probably one of the most important things you could do. Because if you connect with God in the moment, and you know that God is moving you in a certain direction, you will align yourself with the blessed nature of what God is and not be distracted by the winds of the earth or demands placed upon you by influences or perceived notions of what's coming tomorrow or what happened yesterday. So you would be present in the moment and you would move literally and actually as the living presence of God, which would reveal blessing in your actions.
There's millions of moments.
Yes.
You have different moments than I have. We have one moment right now together here talking, but
Yeah.
you still perceive that moment differently than I do, I'm sure.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge,
And
knowing in
that's
the moment.
where I believe that that's one of the creation statements right there. Yeshua said, two, in the fullness of agreement, and it is done upon this earth. What you just described is two people in a like setting, talking about like concept, but each person has their own perceived notion. And people wonder why the prayers aren't manifesting as they want to, because they honestly aren't spending that meditative awareness, that momentary section upon God first, and becoming two in fullness of agreement, not partial agreement, but fullness of agreement on a certain matter. And it's about developing that spiritual fortitude, that spiritual practice, like you mentioned at the beginning of the time together in the interview, was helping people to understand living in the moment and the daily practice that we do. And as you know, within Grace Healing, you've been such an amazing instrument in bringing forth all these understandings. I mean, I don't know, what are we up to, like close to 200 episodes or something like
Yeah,
that,
close to
that people
300.
could actually tap as a resource. Over these past couple of weeks, I've had a recurring theme from people asking for, what do you do in a daily practice? Well, what do you do throughout your day? What do you do within this situation? And I'm thinking in my heart, well, we've provided like 50 some odd instructions on this, whether it's how does one rise in the morning? Where do they begin their day within God's presence? How do they center upon God in every situation that they encounter? That it is first the gap moment. You and I have discussed this repeatedly about that moment we see something rise in front of us, and are we bringing our perception to it, or are we honestly shedding ourselves and embracing God first for the gap, then the divine response, instead of seeing it and reacting based upon
You're muted for some
grace.
reason. Oh,
What's
now it's
that?
good. I got you back. You were muted for like 5 seconds, but
Okay.
now it's
So
good.
instead of us just pushing ahead and taking in the perceptions from the past, or fears for the future, we become that gap moment of God in that moment. God first, then we become a divine response, instead of a spiritual reaction formed by perceptions of the past, or a spiritual reaction formed by anxieties of the future. And one of the things that comes to mind is people ask for this type of information. But I would say, well, what exactly are you doing to apply your daily practice moment to moment? It's like I mentioned to you right before the phone call. Is this like somebody standing there in prayer with a shovel under their chin, leaning on it and expecting God to produce holes in the ground? If you are doing the things that are called your personal practice, whether it's waking in the morning and you breathe in Yahweh, Yeshua, Abun, and you allow yourself a simple 3 breaths or 7 breaths in that awareness of just Yahweh, Yeshua, Abun, Yahweh, Yeshua, Abun, and you've done that for a period of like 40 seconds, 50 seconds, or whatever, and then you're into basic movement within your body. My question is, what are you doing to bring that shovel to actually digging the holes? What are you doing to bring that practice of your morning of intentional awareness, intentional gratitude, blessing to approach your day? What are you doing to develop the spiritual fortitude to employ that in every breath of your day?
And that,
That's where I'm seeing the gap in people, is this. Yes, they have a wonderful practice. Yes, they have a beautiful application. And then they jump into work and it's all that stuff is set aside. And it's like, oh, this panic and that fire and that phone's ringing and this person's got to respond to that. And they're not taking the shovel to the project to actually use the proper tool in the moment.
so, and the crux of the matter is that there needs to be an impulse, a motivation, a reason. And if that's missing, then you won't dig that hole with that shovel, right? So
Exactly.
maybe we need to break it down and say, okay, so how, Larry, how do you, I mean, you have been doing this a long time. For you, it's normal. It becomes second nature, I'm sure. So it does for me, that I choose certain moments in my day where I reflect, where I meditate, where I pray. But for those that have not done that before, how do they get that motivation? Well, yeah, through watching some videos that we do, but you need to be motivated to watch the videos, or you need to be
Right.
motivated to read a certain text, or whatever moves you to do it. I think that's where the problem is. That,
Well, in me, it's become, I have one thing of greatest importance in me, and that is God. To me, God is the most important aspect of every perception I own. So when you said, how do you make it like a second nature? I don't. It's my first nature. I was even talking with somebody that was in deep distress yesterday, and we were going through and dealing with a lot of the spiritual ground that the person was and in and out of the suicidal thoughts, and we released the spirits of suicide, all the different experiences and stuff. And I was just saying that I don't even pick up a hammer without the intention of God in my building work. I don't even go to the chop saw without the intention first, God. It's not a second nature. I go to it, and there's been times where I'm turning around and all of a sudden I have a designer show up on the job. I have the client show up on the job. Everybody's got 3,700 questions, and I got numbers rattling around in my head. I have to engage in the nature of God's presence, or I'm going to allow for worldly and spiritual distraction to undermine my stewardship over his money, over that client's money. I'm going to undermine the stewardship over efficient use of time to bring him what he's looking for in a honest and integritous way. So in me, I desire God first in my morning, Yahweh, Yeshua, Avun, God first in my movement as I begin to stretch and open my body, but God first within my actions. So it's not a second nature. It's not a tool I bring along. It's an engagement first unto God, so God would reveal to me the proper tool for the use. And then it's a forward thing. So again, I think the most important statement to, like in my perception, to remove from that is the concept of second nature. Let it be one's first nature and develop the spiritual fortitude to let that be the nature of how you're governed. First nature, God.
It's a shift of perception from second nature, God making God first nature, and then it will flow. But still, to continue with that thought a little bit, I personally have problems implementing a new routine because I forget, so I can't just say from one day to the next, okay, I'm going to make God first nature. It's not going to work for everyone. There needs to be something else. Like I'm thinking from a practical point of view in life, I could have a journal, I could have an iPhone where I have a reminder that pops up, every 2 hours, God, and says, seek God first, for example. That could be a tool that I could use, right?
Yep.
Maybe that's necessary to do that.
And it may be, because you got to figure that, I mean, in my 60 years, or another person that's in their 28 years old, there's 28 years of programming.
Yeah.
There's 60 years of programming. Thankfully, God by grace moved me to a place when I was in my early 30s to measure God first. It was by grace that it happened. But then I had to develop over the next, 28 years or whatever, up to 60 years, I had to do it on a daily practice. Now, I didn't have the things like apps. I found myself smashing into a wall or banging my head or being confused by a bunch of questions being thrown at me by 6 or 7, 10 people on the job site. And I realized, I don't like this. I don't like this feeling. I don't like this. So I had to go through the boom, 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 banging into it, spiritually, or if you want to describe it that, emotionally, banging into emotional walls to realize, wait a minute, there's got to be a different path here. So what we're trying to help people understand, I believe, within yours and my time here, is the ability to develop this process, this spiritual fortitude to be God first within our thought process, because we don't like having to bang into the walls. We don't want to bounce off of this one or whatever and trip over people in our lives. It is about developing that practiced awareness. And yes, it's taken me a number of years to move from God as my second nature to God as my first nature and my life as a second nature. God is my first nature. What unfolds from that is my second nature.
Just had a thought when you mentioned bumping into people, hitting obstacles in life.
Mhm.
That's of God as well, isn't it? I mean, there is some lesson or something in there.
Well, I believe it's of our journey. And I guess, well, let me look at the process. Like when people talk about their friend that they lost cancer or whatever, and the challenges we went through in fighting their cancer, and they find that God finally took them home.
Mm-hmm.
I completely disagree. God doesn't take anybody. The spiritual process and the earthly journey is what ends physical life. God receives them. It is not that God takes us and thrusts us into suffering. God provides for us clarity, wisdom, and understanding so that the suffering can transmute and become blessing before we enter it, or we enter it and find ourselves in the suffering and go, holy crap, where's God? And we reach for God, and then so if it's God first, you are God first through the maze and obstacles, witnessing them to the side without bringing harm. If you are world first or spiritual influence first, you are bang, smash, boom, walking into wrong turns of the maze. So again, it's God first. You can see the nature of the maze move with ease. And you're flowing through, and you don't even have to see it because you're moving in such a way that you're governed by the divine. Otherwise, it is the world, and the earthly process and the spiritual influences will take life. They will alter the nature of how your cells reproduce in your body because you're carrying such stress, or you're intaking the improper things, or you're over consuming alcohols, or you're over consuming the use of drugs, or you're increasing medication upon your body, or you're relying upon the systems of man. And then you wonder why, oh, I guess God took our brother home. No, the life process took them, God received them, is the way I see it. That's my perception.
Yeah, so yeah, that makes sense. And you know, in the book Alchemy, there's another little section I'd like to read, and it ties in
Yes.
with this. It's really a question of finding the moment of knowledge or awareness, to be aware of what you just described, that it's a receiving by God and not a taking from God, takes
Yes.
that effort and that diligence, that vigilance to be in the moment, to make an effort to be in the moment. And what the book says here is The Alchemy by Paul Selig. He says, now the moment you sit in hold on. Now, the moment you sit in is the only moment you may know in. So now the moment you sit in is the only moment you know in. And knowing is realization. To realize love, to realize joy, is to be as joy, as love in the moment you sit in. You know, to me, that describes exactly what you said, just in different words. You know, if you are
Yes.
in a difficult situation and you, like, somebody is passing, or there's an illness you deal with, if you can
Exactly.
sit in it quietly, you can.
Well, again, when you're talking about like in the moment of somebody's passing, because you know that this is very important within Grace Healing, because we've been dealing with so many people passing over these recent months. Um, People have lost sight through their earthly journey, through their spiritual influences, that life is perpetual. They become distracted by the moment of what they call death instead of seeing it as birth, because their perception has become loss and suffrage instead of blessing and celebration. And as you know, in losing my elder son, it wasn't a tremendous suffrage. It was an initial shock, but God moved me to this place of recognizing God within it. And I was able to honor Christopher's transformation from one form to a new form to serve in the presence of God without veil. But there is a reality that if we can let go of the perceived notions of the past, the fears of the future or the fears without them. What's life going to be without them? Life. Present in the moment would say it's going to be life. I have been gifted tremendous memories with this beautiful gift in my life. I have been blessed with a tremendous opportunity now to bless them in their journey. And from that, I know that I choose God from this moment forward. Not loss, not sadness, not grief, because I release the spirit of grief, then I welcome in the tears. I sit present in the moment as the tears fall forth, because they fall forth in love instead of suffering.
Mm.
So it's no longer in a place of sorrow, but I shift to the tears being these beautiful tears of celebration for what he has become, not what I don't have. I begin to move to a place that is God-centered and celebrating the nature of what creation becomes for somebody else instead of trapped in what I don't get. And it becomes this beautiful recognition that not only do you know there is a God, but you can actually become God in the celebration of life in every encounter that comes forth. You become the nature of God and you begin to speak words of life for what everybody else names as death, but you're calling it the celebration of life, birth into new life. So you're no longer in words that do not propagate and extend the concept of awareness that God is present in all settings, even when it comes to birth into new life. God receives. By that which Yeshua accomplished, God receives all things of a spiritual nature that we release, all the captives that we encounter, like we encounter the spirit of confusion, the spirit of sadness, the spirit of grief, the spirit of whatever. We release these. God receives them. The loved ones that we hold. I also had to look deep within my heart at that time and say, am I going to hold my son prisoner to the life that I have upon this earth? Or am I going to love him so much that I relinquish entirely unto God so that he can be God without Larry's ties to him? That is the love that I believe is present when we embrace first nature God first, not second nature God. Is it becomes, how is this love, how is this moment going to transmute into the fullness of love?
Beautiful. And to recap what you just said, God receives and we release. And I think, to end this discussion here in a minute, maybe we can just recap by giving a recipe or a practice of how can we release. I know we have done that before. You have done that before.
Yeah.
How do we release the captives, those spirits that you mentioned, so that we can have God receive?
Well, to me, it's beautiful that God brought you and I to this conversation the way that we did, because I don't think we've ever really touched upon the first nature, second nature.
Mm-mm.
So if a person can honestly develop the practice of God first nature, I mean, that simple change of perception from God is my second nature to God is my first nature, then life would unfold differently. So the practice, like you used to say, what are 3 things that we could take from the call or the interview? That first off would be first nature God. Second, to do the spiritual release, because if you do first nature God, you will have discernment in you revealing what's holding you back or what the impetus is, what the impediment is between you and the blessed result. God first will provide discernment. You will recognize that, oh, I really feel kind of confused. So I sit, first nature God, I breathe. With intention, I release the spirit of confusion. And I welcome in the truth that the first nature God is with me through clarity. So I'm first nature God, I release the spirit of confusion, I embrace holy clarity within its place. I sit for a moment 1 breath or 3 breaths. That's where humanity blows it. These 3 segments within the prayer, the third one is where they blow it all the time. Allowing for the time to be. Not just being a doer, but allowing yourself that place to be as and at one with God's presence. So it is simply first nature God, second release that which is not of God nature, third sit with it and be. Then allow the God perception of the moment to govern your movement, not the fear or anxiety that preceded those 3 steps. And that's where people miss it, is that, like what you and I have defined as the gap moment. It is, oh my God, anxiety, fear, whatever. No, wait. God is my first nature. I release the spirit of anxiety. I release the fears of the future. I embrace the truth that God is with me now. I breathe as one. And that is where I reside. My next movement is going to be moving through the maze without obstacle.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's really not us doing that much. It's not a huge task. It is, like you said, it's diligence. It's almost like a discipline that becomes a habit. And if we practice that, I made some notes here for myself. We have said this many times before, but we say it a little bit different every time. So that's very good.
But one of the things that I really get the sense of is the importance of us owning the reality that we have to strengthen in spiritual fortitude. That means we can't just, the minister said this on Sunday, and we got to take the time to be with the things we know we need to allow for change within us. We need to allow for the point of transmutation. Once something presents, even in a blessed form, we choose God first, and it can become magnified as an even greater blessing if we allow God to manifest its results instead of how we could make it happen. Spiritual fortitude comes with a peaceful trust and a presence and awareness that God can move this to a blessed result. And that's, to me, it is realistically and actually 1 degree off from how we normally live our lives. That's how simple God made it. It's not something where somebody has to flip to go 180 degrees or 720 degrees, do loop-de-loops around the backyard, all kinds of crazy stuff. It is simply 1 degree. I adjust my course. I repent, which was what it originally meant. It didn't mean some guy with a black hat and a Bible beating the daylights out of people with it to repent, repent, repent. It was a simple refinement, adjustment of 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree. And if we can just take that 1 degree response, fear, anxiety, God nature, 1 degree. Let us become God. Let us breathe. I am freed from the spirit of anxiety, freed from the spirit of fear. I embrace the holy remembrance of God's strength within me, and I breathe. So that simple 3 steps can be a powerful way to transmute the day into a day of blessing instead of all the suffrage we can create while we're running around in panic.
Awesome. Maybe Grace Healing will create an app sometime.
That would be awesome.
Right, with a timer.
We should talk to that guy Andreas and see if he has any ideas.
Yeah. You know what? This may be a good, some people just need maybe that trigger at the beginning, and that may be a nice little tool. But anyway, Larry, thank you for sharing, and it was really great conversation. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today and listening to this message. And I just want to remind everyone again, we have quite an extensive library of resources which you can access through gracehealing.org. And there's links in there to our YouTube channel as well. And you can go directly there with gracehealing.video. We have close to 300 videos now. We're constantly trying to find ways how we can structure it in a way that you can find things easier. And I'm sure we're going to come up with new ways to do that. But there's so many things there, and we encourage you to go there, subscribe to our newsletter, which will send invitations out every week for a meditation call we do on Wednesday night. But thanks,
I
everyone.
want to add an
Yeah.
invite to what you just said. You know, I see the amazing amount of work that you do, amazing amount of work that Deb does, and just incredible investment of time that people have put forward, and Pamela and Ina Marie, and the efforts that I do each day. We welcome the listener that if anybody wants to help us to categorize segments of how the videos work, if they want to spend time and actually they're gifted in the ability, organizational thought, and bringing things into an order and outline format so that people could access a quicker understanding of how to access a video on a specific subject matter, we welcome your emails to reach out to us. And we would love your help if you wanted to do the physical effort to return to Grace Healing in some way, a blessing of your time, a gift of your time, being in the moment and allowing your skills and talents to come forth to help Andreas, to help Deb, to help Ina Marie, to actually get things in a way so people can access them in a time of need. We would be more than happy to receive your help.
Absolutely. Great.
So feel free to go to gracehealing.org or gracehealing.video and take a look at the information, see what's going on. And if you want to participate with this, we would welcome you with open arms and Thanksgiving.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone. And this is a wrap.
Yes.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Bye. All right.